Hey everybody. I'm here at one of my favorite places, the Moon Pool in the San Francisco Botanical Gardens today. This maple tree is especially exquisite. Although all of the trees here, all of the plants here, they are very beautiful. The sounds of the birds are much more vibrant and vital than I ever remember hearing them. Sometimes, while I'm awake these days, I have the feeling that I'm living in a dream, or that the dreaming world and the real world have somehow crashed into each other, so that the real world aspects of it have emerged into our dreaming experience at night, and this is very disorienting. And aspects of our dreaming world are emerging into our waking world, but we are unprepared for this kind of crossover. And one might imagine that those of us who consider ourselves or think, that our history of deep relation with dreaming might prepare us for something like that. Unless our skills are extremely well developed, we will find that we were mistaken. Because these worlds only very rarely leak into one another, and only in a fairly narrow array of ways. Yeah. And I'm not sure that's what's going on. In fact, to be entirely honest, like just about everybody, I don't know what's going on. The anchors upon which I normally depend on for my derivations of meaning and value and identity and time and place, opportunity and risk. These orienting standing stones that I depend upon with my inner compass of awareness, I can't find them right now. And maybe this is familiar to many of you. Some time ago I noticed that for me, and I think it may be a little different for everyone, and probably is not only different in content but in timing, I think that some time ago, in both my waking and my dreaming life, there were shock waves of transformation. Long before the present circumstances, which have thoroughly accelerated and hyperbolized those changes. But yes, long before that, late. I mean, it just depends on how far back I want to go and what I want to look at. But surely, for me, the entire 2000s have been extremely unique and have contained many profoundly unexpected periods of shocking transformation and revelation, developmental evolution for my consciousness and my dreaming self and my waking self. But sometime around the end of 2018, the last 4 months of 2018, maybe, these were particularly challenging in their character and sudden overturning of all that was familiar and much of what was comforting for me and others that I know. I'm sure that different individuals will have different timelines and different expressions of what changed for them and how it changed and when it changed and what that felt like and what that meant and how it was meaningful or confusing, what was comforting, what was frightening, what was indecipherable. But for myself, I am used to having a a modestly steady grasp, if you will, on the anchors, right, around which my felt senses of meaning and identity, I form them not unlike a web, right, not unlike a spider's web. But those anchors and the web were for me torn away and left a kind of a pulsing void or emptiness in their place, and in the place of that from which I would draw vitality and motivation and understanding and awareness, a kind of an inner star, right? That inward light underwent an eclipse. And it was so profound and really terrifying, to be honest, because that light had never been missing throughout my life. In fact, it was as if, you can make many analogies, right? It was as if an invisible breast had been feeding me milk all throughout my human life, and then suddenly a kind of milk I was not even aware I was receiving, and yet upon which my inner self depended, and then suddenly overnight, right, the breast is gone, the milk is gone, there's no more of that. And then slowly, very slowly, since then, I've been able to find very modest sources of this inward nourishment. but I am like one who is starving or dying of thirst inside, in the interiority of myself, and where my soul dwells ordinarily and lives. And I don't know if that inner nourishment will ever return. I cannot tell. The things I would use to tell are not in evidence. I cannot find them. But this is one of the places that I come for nourishment. A place in nature. And I'm here hopefully entirely by myself in terms of human beings. And it's exquisitely beautiful. But I'm a little nervous because I'm not supposed to be here. No one is supposed to be here, except perhaps those people who work here. So I've taken a bit of risk to return to one of the places I am familiar with, and one of the places I am used to receiving nourishment from, because I love this living place. And I remember when I first came here and thought, this isn't a real living place. This is a place humans built on sand dunes, which is ostensibly true, the humans built part. Although, even that language is pretty shaky, because once little ecological communities establish themselves, once this starts to happen, then the spirits of living beings, they form communal networks, even though this language is also wrong, but good enough. And then the place that might previously have just been sand dunes, or had just been sand dunes, becomes alive. Of course, even when it was just sand dunes, it was alive. It just wasn't as diversely alive as this place is. It's very precious to me to be here, but it's also risky. Sometimes when our lives, for some reason, lose some of their intrinsic spark, vitality, it can be important to have adventures. And by adventures, I don't mean recklessness. That will tend to end badly. But we might occasionally want to depart the familiar confines of the boxes we have come to feel safety in the shelter of, and have an adventure of some kind that's redolent with personal meaning, and sometimes historical significance. I have history with this living place, and some of it's quite beautiful, and none of it is particularly ugly. So today I've decided to take a few risks and return to one of the places where my heart recognizes its family, where my soul recognizes its family. And not only it's my family's, but my origins. The origins of my intelligence and my humanity, my body, my mind. So I'm taking a relatively calculated risk for a relatively modest reward. A walk in a familiar garden. And perhaps there's something metaphoric. Perhaps there is a simile. Yeah. In that I've chosen today to come to a place that I feel I belong with and I belong to. A place that's deeply meaningful and beautiful to me. In a time when that's forbidden. There are old stories that our souls were born in a kind of a garden. And then somehow we got into trouble and were evicted. And thereafter could not re-enter the garden. It's not new that our people are in trouble. The kind and scope and universality of the trouble that we're presently in is as yet only modestly revealed. Yeah? Only modestly revealed. None of us actually, there's no one with enough information to know what it is that's going on, or why, or what its origins were, or if some group or person or people were intentionally or somewhat accidentally involved or responsible, although our species has been both intentionally and unconsciously reckless. In our relationships with nature and each other for a very long time. Our groups or wildly disoriented and misoriented by the possibilities of commerce and technology and product, control, convenience, entertainment, distraction, deception, destruction. And some will say, well, this is the nature of our species. And others will say, well, that's a result of this problem a long time ago in a garden we don't understand. Because we've never been there. And perhaps we cannot go there ordinarily. Yet, just as there's a way for me to visit this place, risky though it may be, within us there's a road to our origin. And I don't expect you to believe my story or be religious or believe anyone else's story. But if you're intrepid and curious, I think you may discover there's an unused path inside us that, in a way reminiscent of how the salmon return from the ocean to the waters they were spawned in by doing something that looks impossible, by swimming up waterfalls. The salmon are showing us a secret about ourselves, about the nature and origin of our humanity and our souls. There's some bones here. Something has been eating here. And so I think there's an analogous process that is available while we are incarnate as humans, except that it doesn't require an external traverse. It's there's an inward analog of something like true north, or maybe true east, a direction toward origin, the origin of our humanity, our souls, our incarnation, our intelligence, our minds, our curiosity. And it's possible to follow that very ardently, with great reverence and skillfulness, carefulness, sobriety. We can follow that very gentle fragrance on an inner breeze. That gentle tracery. That like a series of barely visible strands of web leads back to where we came from, and to this day connects us umbilically to our origin. Perhaps in my own life I've been lucky or unlucky enough, or both, to successfully discover and recover knowledge of this matter. Partially intentionally and partially unintentionally, because the deep profundity of that of which I speak was far beyond anything I was capable of imagining, and had I known how beautiful and dangerous the process was beforehand, I might well have balked. I might not have been so intrepid. And I won't say that my own journey left me without scars or injuries. I took some hits along the path. Maybe that is natural, maybe it's a result of my misguided enthusiasm. Or even, my clumsiness, because I have some. I don't know. But I have glimpsed something resembling the gardens that are the origins of our being. And it was not a brief glimpse. It's a long one. And I recognize their likenesses, the likeness of that place, in all that lives. In organism, in ecologies. I recognize the likeness of that transcendental place in plants and insects and animals and waters and mountains and forests and meadows and herbs and trees, insects and bees and wasps, ants and bats and bears and badgers, antelope, oxen, bison, eagles and kestrels and crows and ravens and magpies, and sharks and dolphins and octopuses and squids, plankton, whales, eels and snakes, spiders and centipedes, aphids, flowers, roses, magnolias, praying mantises, opossums, raccoons, skunks. All these beautiful living beings are not merely, they are themselves, and yet they are at once embodiments of the spirits of that original garden, the original family. Or so it seems to me. And again, I'm not recommending that anyone believe me or, decide I'm right. Rather, what would be useful is if we could go together and explore in that direction of our interiority, our humanity, and see then together what we find, while being resistant to the temptations of making models and believing narratives and forming religions and cults and ideologies. Right? Because then, unblinded by such things, we might together have the chance to use our senses wisely and to direct them with intelligence and creativity and trustworthy intuition. The modernity we suffer, for all its apparent convenience, is lethal in the sense of causing a terrible forgetting, causing a catastrophic array of injustices, involving us complicitly in the propagation of such injustices, whether or not we are personally enacting them, or whether we are funding them, or whether we are failing to resist them, or, all the different ways we can unfortunately be involved. This terrible modernity we suffer from, for all its apparent convenience, seems to me a kind of graveyard of the finest nobilities that are natural to our kind of animal, to our human interiority. And so, to whatever degree we may together remember and thus resurrect our virtues, we will succeed in the mysterious adventure of embodying those virtues and restoring some aspect of our human nobility, however subtle or partial it may be. And we live in a time when small acts of great beauty have never been more valuable. And none of us know what the future looks like now. And most of us are justifiably concerned, and some of us are terrified, and some of us are numb, and some are confused, and some are intoxicated, and some are raging. And the predators among us, whatever forms they may take, human and otherwise, that group is very active. That group doesn't have to, it doesn't suffer from skeptical second thoughts, right? It simply sees opportunity and immediately acts and takes advantage of it. And this is not unnatural. All of nature has this quality of storing up energy for a moment of opportunity and then expending whatever energy is required to take advantage, often reproductively, of that opportunity. In fact, those of us who study reproductive processes in nature and ecologies, whether we do so formally or poetically or philosophically or spiritually or all four and more, we're well aware that living beings and ecologies are extremely opportunistic, because the origins of life lie in times when survival was incredibly difficult. And so this sensitivity, this spring-loaded opportunism, is a foundational aspect of the original nature of life. And it's uniquely instanced throughout all of the living ecologies and beings, including we humans. But us humans, we have established all these artificial, simulated ecologies, right? These domains of commerce and economy and commodity and mimicry, the mimicry of value, the mimicry of identity, the mimicry of nobility, the mimicry of virtue. And so we have layered structures of predatory activity. And in a situation like this, in any crisis, some segment of the population will prosper wildly because they don't have second thoughts. They don't have to second guess themselves like cautious or caring or intelligent people will. They just go for the money. And many of them will succeed at amassing more commodities. What are those commodities, really? Well, there's different ways to think of them depending on your purpose, right? And some purposes seem to me more noble than others, but fundamentally, one of the ways that I think about most of the commodities that we presently trade in are that those commodities are the result of inflicting catastrophic injury to living places and ecologies, usually in such a way that it's somewhat hidden, right? Some of it is happening far away from our view, so that we need not constantly be faced with the direct repercussions of having done so, and instead can enjoy, quote unquote, the benefits, quote unquote, that arise from destroying the foundations of life on Earth and the incredible homeostatic benefits that accrue when we do something other than that, right? Because the ecologies contribute to keeping the climate on Earth and the environment on Earth. They don't just contribute, they pretty much single-handedly accomplish the homeostatic maintenance of the environment, so that the anciently conserved living relationships and beings and places can continue to live and grow and adapt and develop and proliferate and transform. And around here, if there's any blessing in the physical dimensions, that's its origin. The living places. So if you decimate those and you turn them into little tokens and coins and numbers in machines and stuff, then there will be cascades of catastrophic repercussion. These can only be evaded for a relatively short period of time until the effects of wiping out the birthplaces of life, the oceans, the anciently conserved forests, entire continents of ecologies. The aspect of our humanity that's motivated and enthusiastic about doing that is disembodied to begin with, right? So that aspect doesn't care at all about the future of life on Earth, the history of life on Earth, its purposive orientations, its nature, nature itself, whales and dolphins and animals, and it doesn't care anything about any of that. It only cares about how to create and enjoy the benefits of commodities in the abstract layer of human social and commercial culture, right? That's all it cares about. It cares about, and it's like a demon or a ghost. It doesn't. This aspect of what it means to be human has no concern whatsoever about living beings or places or histories or futures. It because it's a ghost and it's disembodied and it's this sort of monstrous array of abstractions that have formed an alliance and are like a conglomerate machine monster thing, right? Can be seen in this way. Not only do they not care about living beings and places and histories and futures, they're incapable of noticing them in any real way because they're like the functional processes of machines. There's nothing inside there. There's just an opportunistic agenda. It's like a function, right? It's not, so you have like a function instead of something resembling a heart or a soul or a mind. You just have an array of relatively adaptive functions that orient you in a completely abstract environment of commodities, threats, and opportunities. And that machine, left unchecked, will eat the world. And we have not, as a people, have not yet succeeded at inventing any kind of society capable of resisting effectively or replacing that strange monster that lurks in our collective associations, the things we call corporations and nations and societies and stuff. So in a way, really what we're infected with fundamentally is an array of abstractions that are lethal. And as the agendas as the purposes underlying those abstractions proliferate and develop and evolve, they wipe out not just ecologies and the history of life on Earth and possible futures of life on Earth. They wipe out the possibility of our experience of our own innate humanity, its nobilities, its virtues, its faculties, its intelligences, its originary relationships, the relational contexts in which it flourishes, these in which we flourish, right? And as those are obliterated, we take damage, but the thing we would detect that damage with has been inhibited and overridden, right? And replaced with things that mimic what it would otherwise be doing, right? It's normal activities. An analogy would be the replacement of your experience of your heart and all the arrays of all the domains and dimensions of what hearts are about and involved with and come from and do. And there's not just one thing your heart does. It would be like replacing that in our experience and understanding with a clock whose primary purpose is to tell us when we have to go to work. And that's all it does. It's just a machine that goes around and around in circles that repeat and tells us, okay, now is the time for you to go be a function in an abstract monster of other functions whose goal is to burn down the history and future of life on Earth and transform that into abstract commodities and then distribute those primarily to a very small group of extremely confused human individuals who have learned how to make that process work for them extremely efficiently. And I won't say they're all inhuman, but I might say they're incompletely human. Yeah? The wealthiest people on Earth are a confusing subset of our species. And most of them are not without some expression of humanitarian concern or activity, but we need something more than mere humanitarianism. In fact, we're missing an entire category. We need I don't know what to call it. We need human beings and clades guided by something that's deeply connected with the origins, history, and future of life itself. We need humans capable of understanding the unimaginable breadth and depth of the intelligences that comprise the relationships in nature. We need people capable of communicating about and protecting and enhancing those relationships. We need people capable of demonstrating something so astonishing and beautifully human that no one is willing to do any other thing. And that's not outside our grasp. That's not an achievement beyond the realm of the possible or the accessible. There's a lot of reasons why such a seemingly impossible goal is near at hand, and one of them is that the entire history and future of life on Earth may well depend on us developing such a transformation of our human concern, activity, behavior, desire, motivation, understanding. I don't know whether the insects and plants and birds around me are concerned at all with what I'm saying. But I like to think that my capacity to say it emerges from my deep reverence with, relation with, an adoration for these verbally silent ones, within whose webs my footfalls land, and for whose ancestors I form words to speak in this moment today to those who attend such words. For without this beauty, without these verbally silent ones, my mind and hope and heart collapse. However protective they may seem, we were not born to live in boxes. However exotic our putative modernity may appear, it's toxic to our hearts. It's toxic to our minds. It's painful to cooperate with. And though some of its agonies are subtle, over time, they grow deep. They poison us from the inside. Yeah. And this is intolerable. This is something we should not. This is something we must resist complicity in. Although I'm not a big fan of resistance. I think that the energies required to resist a monumental force are better spent establishing something that co-opts its roots and causes it to crumble, that steals the funding and fuel the monumental forces depend upon for their daily reiteration. And isn't it ironic that we find ourselves at this moment in precisely such a situation? And while many people are perhaps justifiably upset about various perspectives they have about, the great interruption, the sudden stillness, it might be useful for them to pause and notice that many of the processes that fund environmental and relational omnicide enacted by the abstract layers of human culture and belief and activity, so on, that many of the things that fund that nightmare have momentarily paused. The catastrophic drop in the price of oil, for example, is a marker that the false ecology, the abstract, monstrous, destructive network of machines, while not halted, has been interrupted. There's no similar historical event that I'm aware of. And I'm not claiming that it's a signal of supernatural origin. I'll just note the facticity of this. It's a fact. It's what is happening. I don't need an explanation. But that fact, that pause, that's an opportunity. It's the kind of opportunity that we as intelligent human beings should pay attention to. I promise you, the living places and ecologies have noticed. They are paying attention. Many of them have lifespans that are unimaginably brief compared to ours. And some of their relationships have lifespans that exceed the age of our species dramatically, right? And if you want to look for intelligence, look there. Because if you think we were the first appearance of something resembling that in nature, you've got the whole story upside down. We were the beneficiaries of a vast array of intelligences that existed and still exist all around us that we've become completely immune to the influence of, let alone divorced from the experience of contact with. This is not irredeemable, but is the common circumstance of our people and of individuals, though thankfully there are occasional exceptions, most of whom will not indoctrinate you, right? The ones I trust will not indoctrinate you in religions or rituals or even in ceremonies. They will introduce you directly to a path that you can follow into contact and new awareness and understanding and direct experience of the intelligences I hear, revere, remember, recollect, recognize. As an individual, I am tiny and confused. As a participant in nature, I have a role worth inhabiting. Just notice that the contexts to which you connect your idea of self and from which you derive your ideas of role and identity and personhood and so on and so forth, they matter. And if you change them, if you exchange the abstract human anchors of identity and role for embodied, organic relationships with living beings and places, then you not only acquire an entirely new capacity to experience the nature of your human existence and birth, you acquire friends and relations hinted at in myths and religions, counterfeited in stories and films, But you can have a meaningful identity and role in an array of relationships that are real and trustworthy, whose integrity is as old as the sun or the moon or the earth, whose integrity is true because it is not artificial. And that is refreshing. Experiencing that, even to some modest degree, is profoundly refreshing in a time when most of the pivots around which our identity and humanity are orbiting are nonsensical, abstract, commercial, deceptive. Not all of them. Some of us maintain deep, enriching relationships with living places and animals and each other and loved ones and so forth that we can trust mostly, but those relationships are conducted in a context that's been compromised until we're conducting them somewhere else, right? So let's bear that in mind. I won't dismiss them, but we should notice, the context is compromised. The results are going to be dangerous. And to the degree they are compromised, those results will become lethal. I mean this both in the sense of undesirable and deadly, but also in the sense of that which causes forgetting. Yeah? That which causes the loss of our essential awareness, the loss of the inward orientations that we can trust to guide us, to even as individuals, but particularly as groups. Yeah? It's very obvious that the orienting structures established by our ancestors have gone wildly poisonous, right, and are explicitly toxic at this point. So whether or not we like it, our generation and the generations alive right now face the task of reforging trustworthy foundations on which human societies can be based and around which they can orbit. Whether or not we will wait till absolute catastrophe occurs that forces our hand is a question as yet unanswered. My hope is that we won't. My hope is that we'll take the opportunity, because if we wait until we're forced to, we'll be in a catastrophically less advantageous position to accomplish this. And so if we move now and establish cultural and societal and informational and technological associations and frameworks that have integrity and that are trustworthy, then we can rise from our very poorly founded status of the moment towards something worth being human about together. If we don't, if we wait, then we're going to have to do that under grave pressure. And if we have to do it under grave pressure, the results will be less diverse, beneficial, trustworthy. And in fact, we may actually fall a few rungs down the ladder before we are able to make any progress that is reasonable to understand as progress. Yeah? I'm hoping that won't happen, but it's very difficult. Most of the vast majority of the population is used to being led. And without a very charismatic leader or group of people, they're going to largely continue their habitual servile habits, right? And most of the time when powerful leaders are produced, they're corrupted by the power they acquire and transform into parasites. So that's a danger we have to find a way to avoid. We need leaders who are both humble and intelligent, uninterested in wealth, power, or fame. We need, this is an old problem with humans. We need the kind of people who don't want to be leaders. Those are the people we need to be leaders, right? This is a cliche, but it's sort of true. In these videos, I'm trying to embody the role of visionary, and I don't feel entitled or qualified to lead. But I might be willing to if a situation arose that endowed me with that capacity. And I've considered various scenarios under which something like that might occur. But yes, I'm not very interested in fame or power or money. I'm interested in insight, humanity, integrity. I'm interested in rescue, actually. And I've spent most of my life in some way involved in activities that orbit the spirit of rescue, right? And I have an interest in justice, but not in the vengeful kind of justice, in the establishment of relationships that are balanced and meaningful and whose integrity is obvious and trustworthy. Yeah? I'm interested in these kinds of things. And I think that when I was very young, I was impressionable, I was patriotic, I believed in what I understood to be the ideals that our nation was founded on, ideals that I never really saw embodied very well, and we're also somewhat confused, but we're also, those ideals encoded within their structure the responsibility of the people to replace them with something better, and then to continually keep doing that. And that's the kind of thing we need. We don't need a solid structure that just sort of frozenly advances its agendas. That doesn't work. We need something flexible that drops off limbs that don't work anymore and builds a new, establishes something that does in its place and keeps doing that, right? Our minds are like this. They have this capacity to dissolve the entire structure of consciousness into dreaming, right? And then sort of rebuild it from the ground up as we awaken. But this can happen while we're awake, right? We can start to tell a detailed fiction, suddenly realize, wait a minute, that's not what I meant. That's not even true. Collapse that whole thing, start over, and build something new. We need societies capable of that kind of flexibility and resilience. And nature, this is even the wrong word for it, but the living world, the living, all that lives, utilizes this this method. Yeah? A method that dissolves itself and reforges something that works better, and dissolves itself and reforges something that works better. And if we could do that with our intelligence, perhaps we could stop lying to ourselves about, I don't know, damn near everything. Perhaps we could start having experiences of intelligence and integrity that not only fulfill the myths and heroism of our stories, but surpass them. And I believe this is possible. I do. And I hope I may live long enough to see some proof of this in the broadest scope of human society, because I've seen its proof near at hand, right? In small individual relationships, I've seen it. I know we are capable of it. We've just never extended it much beyond very small groups. And there's some strange gravity that happens when groups of humans become large that tends to cause things to go sideways in ways I don't like. I noticed it a long time ago when I was working. Very small groups in companies could work with harmony and efficiency and intelligence, but as you got beyond those groups into the larger sort of segments of a corporate culture, things went wildly wonky, almost invariably. And there were some modest exceptions, but in general, this rule seemed to hold true, and it made me suspect that perhaps we need associations of very small groups that I'd call pod groups, right? And we need to connect those so that they can intelligently form larger groups while retaining local autonomy. That something like this might be the future of intelligent human society. And that's something I just learned it's something I learned partially from observation and partially from the structure of, from understanding the structure of our bodies as an analogy of the possibilities of human cooperation. The sun is beginning to set. I have to try to safely escape the beautiful place that I'd rather stay in. So, for now, I wish you well. May all blessings accrue to you and those you love and those who love you. And may we together embrace the possibilities of our humanity and intelligence that have for so long languished. Bye-bye for now.